Hello. I'm really glad you're here tonight. This hour is different from the rest of the day. It doesn't ask you to decide anything. It doesn't ask you to perform or explain or keep up. It simply invites you to lie still and let your thoughts drift like canoes across calm water. As the years pass, nighttime becomes a kind of companion, a place where the mind is free to wander like the ancient navigators without interruption, where memories return not urgently but patiently like tides, where understanding settles in quietly, the way the lagoon settles after the day's activities have ceased. Later in life, the mind doesn't race the way it once did. It reflects, it revisits, it connects dots that once seemed unrelated, like constellations your grandfather taught you to read. And it does this most honestly when the lights are off and the world has gone silent, when you can almost hear the gentle lapping of water against the shore. This space is for those thoughts, the ones that don't surface during the day, the ones that arrive only when you're alone with yourself, resting, remembering the lagoon of your childhood, and gently making sense of a long, lived-in life shaped by water and community and traditions deeper than the lagoon itself. So take a slow breath. Let your body soften into the bed and allow this night to meet you where you are. And now, before we begin, if this kind of honest, gentle reflection speaks to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And down in the comments, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. There's something comforting about knowing we're all here together, scattered across time zones and oceans, but united in these late hours when the world finally grows still. So settle in, adjust your pillows, find a comfortable position, and know that for the next hour, you're not alone in whatever wisdom you're carrying, whatever understanding you've earned, whatever truths rise to the surface when the lights go out and the lagoon calls to you in memory. Let's begin. You're lying still now, and in the darkness behind your closed eyes, you can see it. The lagoon. Always the lagoon. It's been there your entire life. Every version of you that's ever existed has known those waters, has looked out across that vast expanse of blue and green, has understood without anyone having to say it, that the lagoon was the center of everything, the source, the constant, the witness to every moment of your life and every generation before you. Tonight, in the quiet of this room, you can see it clearly, the way it looks just before dawn when the water is perfectly still, like glass, like a mirror reflecting the fading stars. You've seen it thousands of times, tens of thousands of times, every morning of your childhood, every morning of your youth, every morning you've been blessed to wake up and walk to the shore and look out at those familiar waters. The lagoon at night is different from the lagoon during the day. You learned this early. During the day, it's active, alive with purpose and movement. Canoes crossing, fishermen working, children playing in the shallows, voices calling across the water. The lagoon during the day belongs to everyone, to the community, to the work of living. But the lagoon at night belongs to memory, to reflection, to the quiet conversation between you and everything you've ever been. At night, you can sit at the water's edge, or lie in bed thinking about the water's edge, and the lagoon becomes something else entirely. It becomes a repository of time, a keeper of stories, a witness that never forgets. You remember being small, so small that the lagoon seemed infinite, endless. You couldn't comprehend how far it stretched, how deep it went, how much life existed beneath its surface. You were afraid of it at first. The vastness, the depth, the unknown creatures that lived in waters too deep to see. Your grandmother took your hand. She walked you to the shore when you were very young. The water lapped gently at your feet, warm, warmer than you expected. She told you the lagoon was your ancestor, your protector, your home. She said your people had lived beside this water for longer than anyone could count, that every person who came before you had looked at these same waters, had depended on these same waters, had loved these same waters. You didn't understand then. You were too young, too focused on the immediate fear of the deep water. But she was patient. She came with you every day. She showed you the shallow places where it was safe to wade. She taught you the names of fish you could see darting through the clear water. She explained how the coral grew, how the reef protected the lagoon, how the lagoon protected the islands, how everything was connected in a circle that had no beginning and no end. Slowly, your fear transformed into familiarity. The lagoon wasn't something to be afraid of. It was something to know, to learn, to respect. And as you grew, the lagoon grew with you, not in size, but in meaning, in significance, in the role it played in your understanding of who you were. You remember learning to swim, your older cousins teaching you, their hands supporting you at first, then letting go, trusting you to float, to move through the water on your own. The lagoon held you up. The salt water made you buoyant. You learned that if you relaxed, if you didn't fight it, the water would support you. This was a lesson that extended beyond swimming. Relaxation, trust, allowing yourself to be held. You swam in that lagoon every day of your childhood, in the shallows near the shore where the water was clear and warm and you could see the sandy bottom. You dove for shells. You chased fish. You played games with other children, all of you brown-skinned and salt-crusted, belonging to the water as much as to the land. The lagoon was your playground, your classroom, your church. Everything important happened at the water's edge, or on the water itself. Lessons were taught there. Stories were told there. Relationships were formed there. You learned who you were in relation to that water. Your grandfather taught you to fish. He took you out in the canoe when you were old enough to sit still, old enough to be quiet when quietness was required, old enough to pay attention. The canoe was carved from a single tree, smooth from years of use. It moved through the water with barely a sound. Your grandfather's paddle dipped and pulled with a rhythm he'd learned from his own grandfather. A rhythm that went back generations. A rhythm that was almost ceremonial in its consistency. He showed you where to fish, how to read the water, how to know where the fish would be by the color of the lagoon, by the movement of birds, by the time of day, by the phase of the moon. He taught you that fishing wasn't just about catching fish. It was about understanding patterns, about being part of a system larger than yourself, about taking only what you needed and giving thanks for what you received. You watched him offer the first fish back to the lagoon, a gesture of respect, of reciprocity. The lagoon gave and your family took, but there had to be acknowledgement. There had to be gratitude. There had to be recognition that this relationship was sacred, that it sustained life, that without the lagoon, there would be no community, no food, no life as you knew it. These lessons soaked into you like salt water into wood. They became part of your structure, part of how you understood the world. The lagoon wasn't just a body of water. It was a living entity, a partner in survival, a teacher, a witness, a keeper of memories that stretch back further than any individual life. You remember the stories told at night, the elders gathering, the younger people sitting in circles around them, the lagoon dark and vast beyond the light of the fire. The stories were always about the lagoon, about ancestors who navigated across oceans using only stars and wave patterns and bird flight, about great voyages taken in canoes that seemed too small for such journeys, about islands found and communities established, about survival and resilience and knowledge passed down through generations. The lagoon appeared in every story. It was the highway, the provider, the separator of islands, the connector of people. It was where battles happened, where peace was made, where lovers met, where children were born, where the dying was sometimes taken to be closer to the water one last time. The lagoon witnessed everything, held everything, remembered everything. You learned that your identity was inseparable from the lagoon. You weren't just a person living near water. You were a person of the water. Your ancestors had navigated by stars across thousands of miles of open ocean. They had settled these islands because they understood the sea, because they could read patterns invisible to outsiders, because they carried knowledge of wind and current and reef that allowed them to thrive in a place that would have seemed impossible to others. This knowledge lived in you, in your blood, in your bones, in the way you automatically knew when weather was changing by the feel of the air and the color of the lagoon, in the way you could look at the water and know its depth, in the way you could sense the presence of fish without seeing them. This wasn't magic. This was ancestral knowledge. This was what it meant to belong to a place so completely that you and the place became one thing. You grew older. You became a young adult. The lagoon took on new meanings. It became Timar, a place of freedom, of exploration, of testing yourself against something larger. You dove deeper than you had as a child. You swam farther. You took the canoe out alone and felt the profound independence of being surrounded by water, responsible for yourself, connected to everyone who had ever done the same. The lagoon at sunrise became your meditation. You'd wake early before the village stirred. You'd walk to the shore and watch the light change, watch the darkness lift, watch the stars fade, watch the sky transform from black to purple to pink to orange to blue. Watch the lagoon mirror every change. Watch the water come alive as light touched it. These quiet mornings alone with the lagoon shaped you, gave you space to think, to dream, to wonder about your future, to feel the weight of tradition and the pull of possibility. You were part of a continuous line of people who had lived this way for generations. But you were also your own person, with your own thoughts, your own desires, your own questions about what life might hold. You remember falling in love for the first time, meeting at the lagoon's edge, walking along the shore, sitting on the reef at low tide. The lagoon was where courtship happened, where young people gathered, where relationships formed under the witness of water and stars. You talked for hours, shared dreams, made promises. The lagoon heard every word, held every secret, witnessed every first kiss. The person you loved understood the lagoon the way you did. They had their own relationship with the water, their own memories, their own family stories of fishing and navigation and survival. When you came together, you weren't just joining two people. You were joining two lineages, two families, two sets of stories, all centered around the same lagoon. You were married at the water's edge. Your families gathered. Traditional ceremonies performed. Words spoken that had been spoken at weddings for generations. The lagoon calm that day, perfectly still, as if it too was paying attention, as if it recognized the significance of what was happening. Another generation joining, another family forming, another chapter beginning in the long story of people and water. You built your life together. Your home was close to the shore, close enough that you could hear the lagoon at night, the gentle sound of water moving, breathing, living. You fell asleep to that sound, woke to that sound. It was the rhythm of your days, the pulse beneath everything. You had children. You walked them to the lagoon when they were small, just as your grandmother had walked you. You held their hands. You showed them the safe places. You taught them the names of fish. You explained how the reef protected the lagoon, how the lagoon protected the islands, how everything was connected. You watched fear transform into familiarity, just as it had for you. Your children swam in the same waters you had swum in, played the same games, learned the same lessons. You taught them to fish, to read the water, to respect the lagoon, to understand that they were part of something larger than themselves, part of a community that stretched back generations and would continue forward into generations they couldn't yet imagine. The lagoon became different through their eyes. You saw it fresh again, saw the wonder you'd forgotten was there, saw the magic of clear water and colorful fish, and the way sunlight penetrated to the sandy bottom, saw the joy of diving and swimming and floating, saw yourself in their small brown bodies moving through the water with growing confidence. You took them out in the canoe, taught them to paddle, taught them the rhythm your grandfather had taught you, watched them learn to move the canoe through water with increasing skill, felt pride when they mastered it, when they understood without you having to explain that this was more than recreation, this was heritage, this was identity, this was who you were as a people. But the lagoon also held sadness, loss, grief. You remember when the first person you loved died, someone from your generation, someone who had swum beside you as a child, who had fished with you as a young adult, who had been part of the fabric of community life. Their body was prepared according to tradition. The community gathered. There were ceremonies, words spoken, grief shared. You looked at the lagoon that day, and it seemed different, darker somehow. Or maybe you were darker and projecting that onto the water. But the lagoon had witnessed this death just as it had witnessed this person's birth, had seen their entire life. Every swim, every fish caught, every moment spent at the water's edge. The lagoon remembered them, even as they left the world of the living. This was when you began to understand the lagoon as keeper of the dead as well as the living. All those people who had come before, all those ancestors whose stories were told, they had all looked at this same water, had depended on this same water, had loved this same water, and now they were gone. But the lagoon remained, constant, eternal, witnessing one generation after another. You started to see your own mortality reflected in the lagoon. You weren't young anymore. Your body was changing, moving differently, tiring more easily. You couldn't dive as deep or swim as far. You couldn't spend all day on the water the way you once had. Age was claiming you. Time was passing. The lagoon remained unchanged, while you changed constantly. This should have been frightening, but somehow it wasn't. The lagoon's constancy was comforting, reassuring. You would age and die just as everyone before you had aged and died. But the lagoon would continue. Your children would look at it. Your grandchildren would swim in it. The community would persist. The relationship between people and water would continue. You were temporary. The lagoon was not, and there was peace in that. You watched the community change over the years. Younger people leaving for education, for opportunities, for lives beyond the islands. Fewer canoes on the water. Fewer people fishing, more motorboats, more outside influence, more connection to the wider world. The lagoon remained, but the relationship people had with it was shifting. This created complicated feelings. Pride that young people had opportunities, sadness that traditions were fading, fear that knowledge accumulated over generations might be lost, hope that something essential would persist despite the changes. You held all of these feelings simultaneously. They coexisted like the layers of life in the lagoon itself. Surface and depth, light and shadow, continuity and change. You became an elder yourself. People asked you questions about fishing, about navigation, about the old ways. You tried to explain what you knew, but so much of it wasn't explainable. It was experiential. You couldn't teach someone to read the lagoon from a book or a classroom. They had to spend time on the water. They had to pay attention. They had to let the lagoon teach them the way it had taught you. Some young people were interested. They wanted to learn. They came to you with respect and genuine curiosity. You taught them what you could, took them out in the canoe, showed them what your grandfather had shown you, hoped that they would carry it forward, that the chain wouldn't break completely. Others weren't interested. They had different priorities, different dreams, different relationships with the modern world. You couldn't blame them. The world was different now. Opportunities existed that hadn't existed in your youth. Why should they be limited to the lagoon when the whole world was available to them? But still, there was loss in this. Real loss. Knowledge that had sustained people for centuries was disappearing within a single generation. Ways of reading stars and waves that had allowed your ancestors to navigate across vast oceans were being forgotten. The younger generation knew how to use GPS. But did they understand currents? Could they survive if the technology failed? Would they know how to find home using only what the lagoon itself could tell them? You worried about this. Late at night, looking out at the dark water, wondering what would happen to the knowledge you carried, wondering if you'd done enough to pass it on, wondering if the changing world made your knowledge obsolete or if people would someday regret losing it. The lagoon didn't judge. It simply continued, breathing, living, holding fish and coral and memory, connecting islands, reflecting stars, rising and falling with the tides that had pulled at it since long before humans arrived and would continue long after humans were gone. You found comfort in this, in the lagoon's indifference to human worry, in its constancy, in its ancient rhythm that operated outside of human time and human concern. The lagoon would persist. That was enough. That had to be enough. You sit at the water's edge now, even in memory, even lying in bed far from the shore. In your mind, you're there, your feet in the warm shallows, your eyes on the horizon where lagoon meets sky. The sun is setting. The water is turning gold, then orange, then purple. The colors are so vivid, they seem impossible. But you've seen them thousands of times. You know they're real. This is your meditation now, in your later years, when your body doesn't move the way it once did, when you can't spend all day on the water, when swimming tires you and diving is no longer possible. You come to the shore and you sit and you watch. You let the lagoon speak to you in the language you've been learning your entire life. The language of light on water, the language of tides and currents, the language of birds diving for fish, the language of clouds forming over distant reefs, the language of changing colors that tell you about depth and coral and approaching weather. You're fluent in this language. It's your first language, really. The one you learned before words. The one you'll understand until your last breath. You think about all the versions of yourself that have sat in this exact spot. The child afraid of deep water. The young person testing their courage. The adult in love, planning a future. The parent teaching children. The elder remembering everyone who came before. All of these selves present simultaneously, all of them looking at the same lagoon, all of them seeing something slightly different, because they're different people at different times, with different understandings. The lagoon holds all of these versions of you, just as it holds all versions of everyone in your community. All the children who ever played in these shallows, all the fishermen who ever worked these waters, all the lovers who ever met at this shore, all the elders who ever sat watching sunsets. The lagoon remembers. Or maybe it doesn't remember. Maybe it simply witnesses without judgment or attachment. Maybe that's better. You remember your grandmother's hands, the way they looked when she pointed at the water, teaching you, showing you. Her skin weathered by sun and salt, her fingers strong from a lifetime of work. She's gone now, has been gone for many years. But at the lagoon's edge, you can feel her presence, can hear her voice, can see her face in the light reflected off the water. She taught you that the lagoon was your ancestor, You understand now what she meant. The lagoon is older than any human lineage. It existed before your people arrived on these islands. It will exist after your people are gone or have transformed into something unrecognizable. The lagoon is the true constant, the true elder, the true keeper of time. Your grandfather is in the lagoon too. His spirit, if you believe in such things, or his memory, if you don't. Either way, he's there. Every time you look at the water, you see him paddling his canoe. You see the particular way he held the paddle, the angle of his shoulders, the concentration on his face. You see him offering the first fish back to the lagoon. You see him teaching you patience and respect and the humility required to take from something you depend on absolutely all the people you've loved who are gone now. They're in the lagoon, not literally, but in the sense that the lagoon was a witness to their lives. The water touched them, held them, provided for them. They swam in it and fished in it and looked at it and loved it. They were shaped by it just as you were shaped by it. And now when you look at the lagoon, you see them, you remember them, you feel them present in the quality of light or the particular blue of the water or the sound of small waves lapping at the shore. This is what it means to belong to a place completely, to be so intertwined with a landscape that you can't separate yourself from it. The lagoon is in you. You are in the lagoon. This isn't poetic language. It's literal truth. The fish you've eaten your entire life came from that water. The water you've drunk was pulled from the lagoon or from rain that fell into the lagoon. The salt in your sweat is the salt from that water. Physically, materially, you are made of the lagoon, and when you die, you'll return to it. Your body will be buried on the island, and over time you'll seep into the ground, and eventually back into the lagoon. Or maybe you'll be cremated, and your ashes scattered on the water. Or maybe there will be some other ceremony. But however it happens, you'll return. The lagoon will receive you back, will reclaim what it gave. The circle will complete itself. This thought doesn't frighten you anymore. It used to. When you were younger, when death seemed distant and abstract. But now it seems natural, appropriate. You came from the lagoon. You've lived beside the lagoon. You've been sustained by the lagoon. Of course, you'll return to the lagoon. Where else would you go? At night now, lying in your bed, you listen for the lagoon. Even if you're not close enough to hear it, you listen. You imagine the sound, the gentle rhythmic breathing of water, the soft lapping against the shore, the occasional splash of a fish jumping, the whisper of wind moving across the surface. These sounds are so familiar. They're part of your internal landscape. They play in your mind even in silence. The lagoon at night is different from the lagoon during the day. You've always known this, but now, in your later years, you understand it more deeply. At night, the lagoon becomes timeless. In darkness, it could be any time. It could be 1,000 years ago. It could be 1,000 years from now. The darkness removes context, removes the markers of modern life, removes everything except the essential relationship between water and sky and the islands that rise from the lagoon's embrace. You close your eyes now. You let the image of the lagoon fill your mind. You see it perfectly. Every detail, the exact shade of blue, the way the reef appears as a darker line in the distance, the way the water is clearer over sand and greener over coral, the way light penetrates to different depths in different areas, the way the whole vast expanse seems to glow from within on certain afternoons. This is your meditation, your prayer, your return to source. The lagoon in your mind is as real as the lagoon you could visit if you walked to the shore. Maybe more real, because this lagoon is purified of everything except essence. This lagoon is every version of the lagoon you've ever seen. Every moment you've ever spent at the water's edge, distilled into a single perfect image. You breathe slowly now, deeply. The lagoon breathes with you. You've noticed this over the years. How the water rises and falls like breath. How the tides pull in and out like lungs expanding and contracting. The lagoon is alive. Has always been alive. You've known this since childhood, but you understand it differently now, with the wisdom that comes from decades of watching, of paying attention, of being present to something larger than yourself. The community gathered at the lagoon, always at the lagoon. Every important event happened there. You remember celebrations, festivals, times when all the families came together, when canoes were launched from every shore, when the lagoon filled with people and laughter and music, when food was shared and stories were told and children ran wild along the beaches. These gatherings were how community was maintained, how connections were strengthened, how traditions were passed down, how young people learned who they were in relation to everyone else. You weren't just an individual. You were part of a web of relationships, part of a network of families that stretched across the islands, part of a community that depended on each other for survival and support and continuity. You remember the preparation for these gatherings, the way the whole village would work together, men fishing, women preparing food, children gathering coconuts and breadfruit. Everyone had a role. Everyone contributed. The lagoon provided the centerpiece, the fish, the space, the setting. Everything happened in relationship to the water. The canoes would arrive from other islands. You'd watch them approach across the lagoon, sometimes dozens of them, each one carrying families, carrying food to share, carrying gifts, carrying the expectation of welcome because hospitality was sacred, because refusing welcome was unthinkable, because the islands were separate, but the lagoon connected them, because you were all one people despite living on different pieces of land. These arrivals were ceremonial. There was protocol. There were greetings that had to be performed correctly. There were speeches. There were acknowledgements of relationships and histories. All of this happened at the water's edge. The lagoon witnessed every greeting, every reunion, every strengthening of bonds between families and islands. You remember the feasts, the abundance of food, fish prepared in every way your people knew how, roasted, boiled, raw, wrapped in leaves and cooked in earth ovens, breadfruit and taro, coconut in various forms, everything the lagoon and the islands provided. The food was arranged beautifully, presented with pride, shared generously. Eating together wasn't just about nourishment. It was about communion, about demonstrating abundance, about showing respect for guests, about thanking the lagoon and the land for providing. You learned that meals were sacred, that preparing food was an act of love, that sharing food was how community was created and maintained. After the eating came the stories. The elders would speak. They would tell the old stories, the ones about navigation and discovery, about ancestors who had crossed vast oceans, about the founding of communities, about great storms survived, about conflicts resolved, about lessons learned over generations. These stories weren't entertainment. They were education. They were the preservation of knowledge. They were how identity was transmitted from old to young. You sat in circles listening to these stories. The lagoon dark beyond the firelight, the stars infinite overhead, the voices of the elders rising and falling in rhythms that were almost musical. You absorbed these stories without trying. They entered you the way salt water enters wood. They became part of your structure, part of how you understood who you were and where you came from. Some stories were about the lagoon itself, about its moods, about times when it had been angry, when storms had come and the water had risen and destroyed homes and taken lives. The lagoon could be gentle and it could be violent. It gave life and it could take life. This duality had to be respected, had to be remembered. The stories made sure you never took the lagoon's gentleness for granted. You remember the first time you experienced a typhoon. You were young, but old enough to understand danger. The sky changed, became a color you'd never seen before, green and gray and threatening. The wind picked up. The lagoon transformed from calm to chaos in hours. Waves that normally lapped gently at the shore became walls of water that crashed and destroyed. Your family secured everything, brought the canoe far up onto the land, covered windows, stored food and water, gathered together in the strongest building. You huddled with your siblings and parents and grandparents while the storm raged. The wind screamed, the rain hammered, the lagoon threw itself at the land with fury you hadn't imagined possible. You were terrified. The noise alone was overwhelming. But your grandmother held you. She told you the lagoon was just reminding you of its power, reminding you to stay humble, reminding you that humans didn't control anything, that you lived here only because the lagoon allowed it, that respect was required, that gratitude was necessary, that taking anything for granted was dangerous. The storm passed. It always did. You emerged to find damage, trees down, roofs torn away, debris everywhere. But the community was intact. People immediately began helping each other, sharing what they had, rebuilding what was destroyed. No one was alone in the aftermath. No one was left to struggle by themselves. This was community. This was what it meant to belong to each other. The lagoon was different after the storm, churned up, cloudy, full of debris, but it settled. Within days, the water was clear again. The fish returned. Life continued. The lagoon recovered faster than the people did. This resilience was reassuring. The lagoon had survived countless storms before this one, would survive countless storms after. It was stronger than any single event, more enduring than any temporary chaos. You learned from this that disruption was temporary, that recovery was possible, that community support made survival possible, that the lagoon, like life itself, had rhythms that included both calm and storm, both gentle days and violent ones, both giving and taking away. You couldn't have one without the other. Accepting this was part of maturity. As you grew older, you noticed the seasons, not the dramatic seasons of other places, but subtle shifts, changes in wind patterns, changes in water temperature, changes in which fish were abundant, changes in the quality of light. The lagoon taught you these patterns, showed you how to read the year in small signs that others might miss. You learned when to fish for certain species, when to harvest certain plants, when to expect rain, when to prepare for possible storms. This knowledge wasn't written down. It was observed, experienced, learned through paying attention year after year, through being present to the lagoon in all its variations, through developing a relationship with the water that was based on attentiveness and respect. The moon controlled much of this. You learned to read the moon phases, to understand how they affected tides, how they affected fish behavior, how they determined the best times for certain activities. Night fishing happened according to the moon. You'd go out in the canoe when the moon was full, or nearly full. The lagoon would be bright, almost like daylight, but softer, more magical. You remember those nights, the moon path on the water, the way the lagoon looked almost silver, the silence broken only by paddle dips and water lapping against the canoe. The sense of being in a different world, a timeless world. You could imagine your ancestors doing exactly this, sitting in canoes under the same moon, looking at the same stars, fishing in the same waters. The connection across time was palpable. You weren't alone. You were part of an unbroken chain. The fish you caught on those nights tasted different. Or maybe you just believed they did. Maybe the experience of catching them under moonlight made them seem more precious, more sacred. You brought them home and shared them with family, and the sharing felt important, felt like participating in something ancient and meaningful. The lagoon at night revealed things hidden during the day. Bioluminescence, the water glowing with tiny organisms disturbed by your paddle, like stars in the water, like magic made visible. You would drag your hand through the water and watch it light up. Watch the glow trail behind your fingers. This never stopped amazing you, no matter how many times you saw it. The lagoon holding light within itself, creating beauty in darkness. You showed this to your children when they were old enough. Took them out on the canoe at night, let them see the bioluminescence. Watch their faces light up with wonder. This was inheritance. This was what you passed down. Not just knowledge of fishing or navigation, but wonder, appreciation, the capacity to be amazed by the lagoon's gifts. The lagoon held other secrets too. The shipwrecks, the remnants of the war that came to your islands decades before you were born. The ships and planes that sank during the fighting. They rested on the lagoon floor now, covered in coral, home to fish, transformed from instruments of destruction into reefs that supported life. You dove to see them when you were young, the ghostly shapes of ships lying in the clear water, still recognizable even after years underwater, still carrying the weight of history, of violence, that had nothing to do with your people, but affected your islands anyway. The war brought destruction, brought death, changed everything about how the outside world related to your islands. But the lagoon transformed what the war left behind, covered it with life, made it part of the ecosystem. This seemed right somehow. The lagoon taking human violence and converting it into something useful, something beautiful even. The ships became homes for fish, became diving sites, became part of the lagoon story rather than separate from it. You learned that the lagoon was more powerful than human conflict, more enduring than any empire, more resilient than any military force. The ships rotted, the empires fell, the soldiers left or died, but the lagoon remained, continued, outlasted everything. This was comforting in a deep way. Whatever humans did to each other, the lagoon would persist, would continue breathing, would continue holding the islands, would continue providing. The outside world came more frequently as you aged. Tourists wanting to dive the wrecks, researchers studying the coral, developers proposing changes, people with plans and ideas and money. They looked at the lagoon and saw opportunity, saw potential, saw something to be exploited or managed or improved. You looked at the lagoon and saw home, saw ancestor, saw the source of everything that mattered. The difference in these perspectives was profound, impossible to reconcile fully. The outsiders meant well, some of them, but they didn't understand, couldn't understand. They hadn't grown up with the lagoon, hadn't been shaped by it, hadn't learned to read its moods and respect its power. You watched your community navigate these changes, saw some people embrace outside influence, saw others resist it, saw most people trying to find balance, trying to preserve what was essential while accepting what seemed inevitable. It was complicated. There were no easy answers. The lagoon didn't offer guidance on this. The lagoon simply continued being itself while everything around it shifted. You worried about the future, about what would be lost, about whether your grandchildren would have the same relationship with the lagoon that you'd had, about whether the knowledge you carried would die with your generation, about whether the community would fragment as people moved away or adopted different values or lost connection to the traditions that had sustained everyone for so long. But you also saw resilience, saw young people asking questions, wanting to learn, caring about their heritage even as they engaged with the modern world, saw the community adapting without completely abandoning who they were, saw the lagoon continuing to teach anyone who paid attention, saw that maybe change didn't have to mean total loss, that maybe something essential could persist even as forms changed. You sit with these thoughts now, in the darkness of your room, in the quiet of night. The lagoon exists in your mind as clearly as if you were sitting at its shore. You can see it, feel it, hear it, smell it, the salt air, the warm water, the particular quality of light. All of it present even in absence, all of it part of you in ways that can never be taken away. This is what it means to carry a place inside yourself, to be so formed by a landscape that it becomes inseparable from your identity. You aren't just someone who lived near the lagoon. You are someone of the lagoon. The distinction matters. One is geography, the other is essence. The lagoon taught you everything important. Patience from fishing, respect from storms, humility from the vast depths you couldn't fully know, connection from seeing how everything in the ecosystem depended on everything else, resilience from watching the water recover from disruption, continuity from recognizing that the lagoon long predated you and would long outlast you. These weren't abstract lessons. They were lived, embodied, learned through experience rather than instruction. The lagoon was your first and most important teacher, more influential than any school, more formative than any book, more essential than any human mentor. The lagoon taught you how to be, how to live, how to understand your place in the larger web of existence. You carry this teaching with you always. It influences how you move through the world, how you make decisions, how you relate to other people, how you face challenges, how you accept loss, how you celebrate joy. Everything filters through the lens the lagoon created. Everything is understood in terms the lagoon taught you. Your body is changing now, growing older, less capable, more fragile. You can't do what you once could, can't swim as far, can't dive as deep, can't spend hours paddling, can't work like you used to. This is hard. Accepting limitation, accepting decline, accepting that your relationship with the lagoon must change because your body is changing. But you can still look, can still listen, can still remember, can still feel the connection that exists regardless of physical capacity. The lagoon doesn't require you to be strong, doesn't require you to be young, doesn't require you to perform. It simply exists, constant, available, welcoming whoever approaches with respect. You go to the shore now just to sit, to be present, to witness. This is enough, more than enough. The lagoon accepts your presence without demanding anything, without judging your limitations, without requiring you to be anything other than what you are. This acceptance is healing, comforting. It allows you to accept yourself, to make peace with aging, to recognize that value isn't determined by physical capacity. The younger people in your community sometimes ask you about the old days, about how things used to be. You try to explain, but you know your words are inadequate. You know that understanding the lagoon requires direct experience, requires time, requires attention, requires a willingness to be shaped by something larger than yourself. You tell them stories anyway. You describe fishing techniques. You explain navigation methods. You talk about ceremonies and traditions. You share what you remember about people long gone, about ways of living that have mostly disappeared. You do this not because you expect them to recreate the past, but because you want them to know they come from something, that they belong to a lineage, that the lagoon has always been central to who your people are. Some listen carefully. Some are polite but distracted. Some seem genuinely interested. You can't control how your words are received. You can only offer what you know. Plant seeds. Hope something takes root. Trust that what's meant to continue will continue. The lagoon doesn't need you to preserve it. It will persist regardless. But the relationship between people and lagoon needs tending, needs transmission, needs new generations choosing to engage, choosing to learn, choosing to participate in the ancient conversation between land and water and human community. You've done what you could, taught your children, welcomed your grandchildren, shared your knowledge when asked, modeled a way of being that honors the lagoon. This is all anyone can do. Pass the flame. Hope it continues burning. Accept that you can't control what happens after you're gone. Lying here now, in darkness, in silence. You feel at peace with this. You've lived a good life, a life connected to something larger than yourself, a life shaped by the lagoon and by community, a life that had meaning beyond individual achievement, a life that was part of a pattern, part of a story much older and larger than your own brief existence. The lagoon will continue after you're gone, will hold the next generation, will teach whoever pays attention, will provide for whoever approaches with respect, will witness the ongoing story of your people and your islands, will breathe in and out like it has always done, will reflect stars and moon and sun, will hold fish and coral and memory. This continuity is what you rest in now, the knowledge that you are part of something ongoing, that your life, however small in the cosmic scheme, was connected to something eternal. The lagoon was here before you, will be here after you. And for the time you existed, you were in relationship with it. You knew it, loved it, learned from it, were shaped by it. This is enough. This is more than enough. This is everything. You close your eyes, and the lagoon is still there, behind your eyelids, in your mind, in your heart, in your cells. The water that makes up most of your body came from the lagoon ultimately. The fish you ate became your flesh. The salt in your blood is the salt from that water. Scientifically, literally, you are made of the lagoon. And when you die, you'll return. The elements that compose you will go back, will rejoin the water and the earth, will become part of the lagoon again, will feed fish and coral, will participate in the ongoing cycle of life and death and transformation. Nothing is lost. Everything continues, just in different forms. This is the final teaching, the one the lagoon has been showing you all along. Impermanence, continuity, the way individual forms arise and dissolve, but the pattern continues. You are a wave, temporary, but you are also the ocean, eternal. Both are true simultaneously. You breathe slowly now. Feel your chest rise and fall, like tides, like the lagoon breathing. You are separate from the lagoon only in the most superficial sense. Fundamentally, you are not separate. Fundamentally, you are part of the same system, the same life, the same ongoing expression of existence. The lagoon in your mind grows quieter now, stiller. The water perfectly calm, reflecting a sky full of stars. No wind, no waves, just peaceful presence, just being. This is what you rest in, this perfect stillness, this complete peace. You've traveled far tonight, through memory, through time, through every version of yourself that ever existed. You visited the lagoon as child and adult and elder. You've remembered learning and teaching and witnessing. You've traced the pattern of your life as it was lived in relationship to water. Now it's time to rest, to let the memories settle like sediment, to let the images fade, to let the lagoon hold you one more time, not physically, but in spirit, in essence, in the deep connection that transcends physical presence. The water holds you, supports you, surrounds you, even here, even now, even in this bed, far from the shore. You are held, you are safe, you are home. Let your breathing slow, let your muscles relax, let your mind grow quiet. The lagoon breathes with you, the lagoon holds you. The lagoon witnesses this moment of rest as it has witnessed every moment of your life. You are part of something eternal, something beautiful, something meaningful. The lagoon taught you this, showed you this, made it real through decades of relationship and attention and love. Rest now. Let the lagoon rock you gently. Let the memories drift like canoes across calm water. Let sleep come like the tide. Natural, inevitable, welcome. You belong to the lagoon. The lagoon belongs to you. This relationship continues in life and in death, in waking and in sleep, in presence and in memory, always. Forever, connected. The fires die down, the stories settle, and the world grows still. Let your thoughts drift away like embers on the wind. Good night. You've journeyed far through time tonight. Now it's time to journey into dreams. Close your eyes, breathe, and let sleep find you.